Yeah, so we're gonna get started on our final session for today. My name is Craig Moore. Every third Wednesday, Black Excellence KC hosts the Rebuild Honestly panel, and these panels are constructed for us to have authentic, transparent conversations around just subjects that impact the Black community, and specifically. For those who don't know, next week, and this is probably going to be a little time lock with our YouTube channel, but next week we're having the National Society of Black Engineers. Man, it took me a long time to get that acronym together. I was like, NSBE? Okay. But to get NSBE's 49th convention is coming into Kansas City, where to me it's from what I understand, is probably the largest engineering, in a sense, job fair connection for talent and just large brands. So you'll have like Snapchat and all the major oil companies, Tesla, and of course a lot of our local engineering firms will be in the space as around 20,000. Okay, so about 20,000 Black professionals will be on Kansas City soil, just kind of looking for their next place of work. And so to me, it just made sense for us to have this conversation about retaining. We're going to talk about attracting too. So we're going to talk about attracting and retaining Black talent specifically. And I think, not only is that happening, but what I feel like is also happening that, as we know, George Floyd has really caused a lot of companies and corporations to make certain promises to the Black community. And I think because of the economic turn, they're kind of like retracting. I did a meme the other day where it was a Family Guy episode and the white people was zipping themselves back up like we was Black, but nope, not no more. But to me, that's a real problem, right? That's an issue, and it causes for a conversation. So I pulled together some of the greatest minds I feel like that are in the space that I've been able to connect with, who represent, I feel like, the Black community in many different ways when it comes to the talent aspect. And so I never really introduced my guests, so I'm gonna allow you all to introduce who you are, the title or titles that you hold, and what would you like to bring to this conversation? So I'm going to start to my immediate right.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Kaila Wilson. I am the current president of the National Society of Black Engineering Professionals here in Kansas City. Thank you. And I currently work as a senior PP&C analyst or programs projects control analyst for Honeywell FMNT. I do a lot of things outside of that. I also run a CEO and founder of a biotechnology and hair science startup. So that's one of my little loves there, as well as I love giving back to the community as far as doing consulting and professional and personal development in the spaces of what I call Seek Resources.
Okay, here we go. I'm Portia Kibble Smith. I'm a Kansas City native. I also work for a tech company out of Seattle called Karat, and we do first round interviews for software engineers. I've been in the tech space my entire career. So I worked for IBM, I worked for Xerox, and most recently out of corporate America, I worked for Sprint, and now I work for Karat, and I created a program to help more Blacks get into tech who are software engineers, because we were having roadblocks, and the name of the program is called Brilliant Black Minds. And so in addition to that, I have my own search firm where I help more at the executive level get into executive level positions at companies as well. So I'm definitely committed to the cause, without a doubt. And I have years of experience of recruiting
means we
and
got
retention.
some stories.
Yeah, I got some stories.
We got some
Okay.
stories. Okay.
Hello, everyone. I'm Myisha Boyd. I'm just humbled that Craig called me one of the greatest minds, or us one of the greatest minds. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I currently lead DE&I communications for T-Mobile. Prior to that, or two roles prior to that. I was the DE&I manager at Black and Beach, so their first ever DE&I manager, and built and started executing their first ever 3-year DE&I strategy. I'm also on the executive team of BXKC. I'm an equity rep for an organization called Suburban Balance, who advocates for equity within our school districts and bettering the experiences of Black youth within suburban areas. And I'm just happy to tap into this conversation. I think it's such a much needed conversation that, and I'm glad that we're tapping into not only the attraction piece, but also the retention piece, because I think that's so key. A lot of companies don't realize that both of those things really have to work and happen hand in hand. So thank you for that.
So yeah, you brought up a good point, like about the attracting and retaining piece. One big statistic that I always talk about is that, speaking of engineers, Kansas City is the #2 location for Black engineers to land, just because we have such a diverse opportunities when it comes to engineering firms, but we cannot retain them longer than 3 years because they lack the sense of community, the proximity around resources. Why am I out of breath? Lord have mercy. And there's just a lot that goes to it. And so we'd love to just kind of hear you all's perspective on, it seems like we're getting the attracting piece right, but what is it that you feel like in your space that you've seen is missing when it comes to retaining that talent? Anybody can answer.
Well, I'll start. I would say one of the things I think makes people want to leave is that the companies that have recruited them here to Kansas City have promised them something that they haven't been able to deliver on. So people get disappointed with the mere fact that you promised me that I could be a director in 3 years and then a VP in 6 years, and yet here I am 4 years later still sitting as a manager. And I see my other white counterparts moving up into other positions, and yet I'm being given opportunity, I'm being told or given feedback that, well, it won't happen this year, but maybe next year. And so at some point you realize that maybe this isn't the right city, maybe this isn't the right company. And then you look around the city and you say, where else can I go? And there are not that many places that you could go with your skill set and still feel that you can move up, because other counterparts are saying the same thing about other companies. So it's not just one company per se. To me in Kansas City, it's several companies that we can recruit people. And even I want to touch on what's going to happen next week at, what makes someone come up to your booth. Yeah. So
yeah, I was going to say, I think what you were touching on too is it's all about the employee experience. And Craig and I have talked about this as we're thinking about BXKC programming, is that, I think companies don't realize like that whole entire experience matters. So if you think about the employee kind of journey, that experience, like it doesn't just stop at the hiring, you get them in the door, but what about development? How are you developing your Black employees? How are you thinking about the onboarding of your Black employees? How are you thinking about the promotion, what that looks like for them? And so I think so often companies try to only do intentional tailored programming on certain pieces of the employee life cycle, but they don't realize that you have to carry that out through the entire, through all the processes, through all the employee life cycle processes. So you can't just focus on, okay, let's do this so we can hire more Black employees. We're gonna do this kind of tailoring to our hiring and our recruitment, but then you don't carry that into your development process, into your promotion process, into your succession processes, and so on. Like it has to be tailored and intentional throughout the entire life cycle.
And I would agree with that. So one of the areas that, for me personally, so when you step into some of these spaces, a lot of times you're not getting a good mentor. And oftentimes they'll pair you with somebody, they'll call it a mentor, but as far as them actually mentoring you in that space, kind of, it's not always manifesting into you getting to a better career, a better type of opportunity, or they're not even edifying you in rooms that you need to step into or be exposed to or things of that nature as well. And I also think there's not a true clear path forward as well, because most times, to your point, when we're trying to, maybe most times you might see the main person that you might see who might be Black and hire, let's say, executives, typically most times might be the DEI chair, right? We don't see a lot of Black people that sit in C-suite. We don't see a clear path forward that lets us know that, hey, this is attainable. We have somebody who represents us, who I resonate with, or who maybe I can, might have a shared experience, so that we can actually grow and develop into those same spaces. So I think a lot of times that intentionality, to your point, needs to be present, and a lot of times it's often lacking. Or we'll just pair you with somebody just because they might have seniority, but they have no sense of people skills or no sense of shared experience, or not understanding some of these inequities that sit against you even stepping foot into this space, as well as developing the skill set associated with getting to those next steps as well. A lot of times that is kind of fallen by the wayside or left up to the employee to kind of figure that out for themselves. And that, time and time again, doesn't always, you'll typically just go somewhere else.
And you mentioned, like, a lot of these corporations, when they do have somebody in an executive level, they're in that DEI space. I don't want to just harp on things that they're doing wrong. What do you feel like is being done right, or is not being done enough of, that you feel like will help retain the talent? If it is none, there is none. But just want to make sure that we tap into both sides of it.
I think they need to see people who have P&L responsibility, and that person needs. You can't mentor everyone,
right?
But there is such thing as group mentoring. And I think sometimes that needs to take place, where there, perhaps a guest speaker with 20 people in the room, and you're actually talking to them about, here's how I got to where I am. You can do it as well. And then I think we also need their white counterparts to say, hey, I'm committed to making something happen for you. And it's not in a mentor type relationship. I think it needs to be a sponsor that says, when you're not in the room, I'm going to say something because I believe that Craig is ready now for the next role. So you don't have to necessarily apply, just like what happens in the good old boy network. You're not necessarily applying, you're actually being picked or plucked for a certain opportunity. And oftentimes we're not in the room, we're not at the table, we don't know anything about even the meeting. And so that causes a problem. And then when you look around and you say, and the company talks about core values and the things that they really believe in, but then you don't see yourself. Then you get disappointed and you say, where is a clear path forward for me to be an executive here one day? And if you don't see it, it's hard for you to believe that you can be it.
Myisha, I want to go a little bit step further with that question. As someone who served in, like, the inaugural role of a DEI space, how was it for you to, one, be in that position, and then, just kind of like, I guess, like, what was that experience of starting that? To me, I feel like it was probably a lot like how everybody expected Obama to be. It's like, once you get into that position, you're gonna let us all in, but it doesn't really work like that. How was it balancing that, but then also still trying to find ways to make sure that your community was seen?
Gosh, that's such a good question. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, like, it was definitely rough. I think especially when you are somebody who is very much so impacted by that work, because of your own lived experience, that just only amplifies, like, when you hit a barrier or a roadblock, or you have those really tough conversations where you're in a meeting and somebody says something, or you're trying to explain why it's important to do something, and again, it's like that microaggression, like, it just amplifies that sense of, like, damn, like, we're never gonna get ahead, and I'm pushing so hard, so hard and fast, not even fast, but just pushing hard for progress, but it just seems like I continue to hit roadblocks. But I think it definitely opened my eyes to a lot of things that I wasn't aware of or privy to before. So I'm really grateful for that. Like, understanding, like I was talking about, the employee life cycle, and that, making that transition. Most of my career has been in marketing communications on the external facing side of the house. And so moving over into the people side of the house and getting a better understanding of, like, HR processes, things like that. I felt like a veil came off for me. I was just like, oh shit, this is all happening behind the scenes. Like, this is like, and it's interesting because I feel like if more people knew, and especially if Black folks had a better understanding of the employee life cycle, what's going on behind the scenes, you could really take more ownership and advocate for your career in a way that you couldn't without knowing those things. I definitely would recommend folks to start having those ask the tough questions, like, hey, how does growth work here? How does development work here? Things like that, and just better understand how things work within your company as it relates to your own employee experience, and advocate for the changes you want to see.
And Kaila, is like being a leader of a group of professionals who are, coming into this space where DEI now is being pushed a little bit harder. What do you feel like is the general consensus of how they're receiving these new initiatives, and what's going to happen in the future?
Okay. So
Yeah.
right. So the real perspective, I would say for the consensus of us, is that it's centered around more so we recognize that for a lot of companies, unfortunately, sometimes it seems that diversity and inclusion are more so buzzwords rather than actually being actionable items that people are putting in place. Because a lot of times that bias of you're saying you're trying to recruit talent or retain talent and things of that nature, but is it factored into your budget? Like, do you actually have space or sponsorship, to your point, to really usher somebody in or usher them to opportunities or say, hey, we have this conference that's coming up next week. Are you sponsoring your students or your employees to go into these different spaces on behalf of the company, not just from a recruiting perspective? Like, are you going there so they can develop their skill set? Because we have workshops and things of that nature too. So I would say just kind of finding, again, back to that mentorship piece, making sure that you can find somebody. It doesn't have to necessarily be for that company per se, but just are we finding good mentors that would help us get into some of those avenues as well. And then really understanding when we're talking about value and valuing your employees, especially as whether you're early professional or even some of your later professionals, we all recognize, I personally would bargain to say that nobody's interested in working for companies for the rest of their life until they die. The main point of reason why we're here is so that we are trying to develop ourselves as people so we can get the skill sets that we need, so we can, whether it be an entrepreneurial venture or whether it be just to kind of be a better, skill, well-versed type of person. And then, but the other piece of that is also, are we getting compensated well in that space for the amount of work? Because I would tell you one thing, I don't know if it resonates, but when companies kind of lead with this, oh, we're a family type of perspective. Sorry, for me, that's a red flag, because honestly, that tends to lead more towards the aspect of saying that we may end up exploiting more of your boundaries to suggest that you stay a little bit later while we don't pay you for the work that you're doing, or some of those things too. And you'll have this young, eager mind that's we're gonna stay, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna, show ourselves, and they'll get burnt out in those first couple of years. And so some of those little pieces, whether they, I think that should be more intentional about valuing that piece. And I would say that's kind of been what I found to be the consensus across everybody. It's like, I don't feel like I'm being valued as far as my compensation. We're not talking about, like, even if it's not just from a salary perspective, it could be something like, okay, are we discussing stock and options? Are we discussing, some of those ways to really build our 401k? Are we discussing some of those ways, like the path forward of like how we can move into C-suite or executive positions? Or what does that time frame even take? And is it taking me longer than it would typically take my white counterparts? Some of those different areas too. So I would say that was kind of the general sweep across, my members, whether early professional or later career.
Ms. Portia, I think it's safe to say that you probably hired most of the top executives in Kansas City when it comes to the tech space a little bit. How have you seen the, I guess, your industry kind of transition into the space that they're in post George Floyd? Do you feel like there's been evolution or progression when it comes to hiring Black professionals in the C-suite space or providing that trajectory for them?
It has, but it hasn't been here in Kansas City. And so as a matter of fact, one of the recruits that I had early on, I was told that by a major company here, that if I hired her and she wasn't successful, that I would be fired. And did I still want to make her an offer? And I said yes. And my manager told me, well, you're a fool to even say that. And today I'm proud to say that she has left the company here in Kansas City, moved to another company, and now she's at another company and she is the CIO. Mm-hmm. So she had the opportunity, and I think that's what most people are looking for, is just give me the opportunity, because she could have been CIO here in Kansas City. She didn't necessarily have to move from Kansas City because she had the skill set in order to do so, but she didn't have the opportunity. And I think that's what most people are looking for. Give me the opportunity. Give me the development opportunities that other people have that you don't even look at me for. Are you allowing me to even job shadow you? You say you're my mentor, but you've never taken me to one of your meetings or introduced me to anyone. And so those are just some of the key aspects to me of, are you really committed? Or are you just, are you walking the talk, or are you just talking?
And you guys mentioned something, sponsorship, right? And I think, so we just recently had our Millionaire Mindset brunch, and Judge Wimes, and that was the first time I heard where he was like, you need a sponsor and a mentor in the same space. How do you all suggest that somebody find that mentor or sponsor? Like, what's the best way to vet that person who's going to actually be in those other rooms kind of helping you out? Or, I mean, if you guys have the answer,
I would say for a mentor, a lot of companies are starting to launch. I mean, I feel like this is like the go-to for a lot of companies right now. Let's do a mentor and sponsorship program, right? But they're not like actually giving these mentors a cultural competency to actually help understand the Black experience and help elevate and advocate for Black employees. So that's also problematic. But so I would say for a mentor, if you are in a position to find your own mentor, I would say definitely find someone who, and I fully, believe that, your mentor doesn't have to have the same identity as you. I think for me, it is helpful for me to have a mentor who's a Black woman, just because I have a very specific experience in the workplace that, it's great to be able to have someone that I can talk to those things with that will understand that experience and who can give me guidance based on our shared lived experiences. And I mentor, young Black women who also, find comfort in that as well. And so I would say find somebody who you feel like you can be your authentic self with, right? But also as somebody that has the wherewithal, the knowledge, the experience that you're trying to seek and you're trying to gain. And that skill set and the knowledge and experience doesn't mean that they're in the position that you want to get to, or that's like, oh, I want to be a VP of this, and so I need to find somebody to be. But think about the things that you need to stretch yourself in. So I know I'm not a great if I, for instance, didn't think I was a great communicator, I knew that's the skills that I want to work on. I might say, I want somebody who I can be my authentic self with. For me, that's a Black woman who is, in the communications field or something like that. So I think there's different ways that you can think about it. I would definitely say you can have different mentors too. So I might want to have a Black woman mentor, but also, might have a white man mentor, because I feel like there's certain perspectives he can give me that, I don't have based on my own experience. And then I would say for a sponsor, I would look for somebody who can advocate for your work, that understands your work, because that's essentially what a sponsor is. It's somebody that can advocate for you, your work, your achievements, your successes, your skills, your talents in the room when you're not there. So you want somebody that understands that work, that can advocate for it, that believes in you, that pushes you, because you want them to be in the room and saying, hey, this person is somebody who also needs a seat at the table, and here's why.
Love it. I want to take a step back a little bit, because we just kind of, go ahead. If
I'm
you're ready,
just going
go
to
ahead.
add a little tidbit that one of my mentors told me.
Please.
So I guess one of the greatest pieces of advice that I've gotten as somebody told me as my mentor, he said that when you go about finding a mentor, oftentimes we do kind of gravitate to those that look just like us, who have that shared experience and things of that nature too. But we also run into the aspects of, how do we part of that problem was, how do we step in some of these rooms that we're not a part of, right? So that might also imply that those people might not also be part of some of those rooms, or they're in part of those rooms kind of differently, and not necessarily in the way that you're trying to step into that, right? So the other piece of that is to also recognize and understand it's not all bad that you can have people who look like you aren't always your friend. And people who don't look like you are always not your enemy. And so sometimes you will need somebody who doesn't look like you, who could edify you in some of these spaces beforehand, because there's no one else that looks like you in those rooms. So I think that's also important to add, and not to take it from this perspective, well, it's only people who look like me who understand so they can propel us forward. It's like, but they also most likely might have some of those same challenges. So then you need to find other people who might not, who can be able to edify and help you break some of those barriers down as well.
Do you feel like...
And I do have one other thing to add to that, because we're talking about mentors. I also don't believe that your mentor, that you do need more than one mentor, but they don't always have to be at your same company either. Because I think that sometimes you're not finding that person in the company, but they can also help give you guidance. I also think that companies sometimes miss the opportunity when they see someone who they're trying to get them ready. They may need a coach. And you have to say, I want to invest in this person and give them the coaching skills that they need in order to be successful. So I think sometimes people overlook that. So sometimes the mentor can't do it, but it's certainly the mentor can work with the coach to say, here's what I think they need. And so that they can hand them over to the sponsor and get them what they need.
I love it. I wanted to take a step back a little bit, because it dawned on me that I probably should have had some type of way that I was progressing to this. So I want to go back to the attracting piece, right? And with NSBE coming up, There's going to be a lot of vendors in the room, a lot of people in the spaces, and I could tell on TV now that everybody's trying to be about DEI because there is no black and white people no more. Everybody's just mixed, and you don't know where they come from, which I understand how they're doing that, but then how do I, as I'm going into these spaces and there's all this branding out there that seems welcoming, how do I identify that the space that is looking for me to be their next person that they hire is truly an authentic and safe space for me to be at? Go ahead.
Okay.
You ready?
Okay, so this is interesting. So I like to focus on kind of understanding like human psychology, right? And kind of paying attention to people, because most times, if you, let's say for recruiters, for instance, most times people want to gravitate to the one that is like super bubbly, right? And let's call her Bubbly Becky. And then you'll also have, Stern Sam over here. And you'll think that you'll be more inclined to get the opportunity with going with Bubbly Becky. However, Stern Sam might actually be the one that takes you serious, that might bat for you, might vet you properly to make sure that you are the one that should be in the room. And so I personally would say evaluate yourself, just who you are, what do you resonate with, what can you speak to, and then find the personality type that would more so resonate with you, rather than just going with the person that seemingly seems really happy across everybody. Because if they have this demeanor about themselves and they seem to have the same exact experience with every single person that they're shaking hands with, it's like, that to me is a red flag. That doesn't show that that person will actually be the true advocate that you're looking for to get you to the next step. They might just say, oh, thank you, great. It's like, no, that's probably most likely not the person you want. Now, I would say go with the people that you can also pay attention to, like, are they making eye contact with you? Like, do they seem to be, or are they just kind of like, and then they're not really listening to what you're saying, they're not giving you any proper feedback. I mean, all those different things you can tell, and a lot of those things you can pick up on before even going to approach that person. Because mind you, if you're operating like, let's say in a career fair sense, right? There's hundreds of companies, and your odds of trying to talk to all the companies and find the proper you're gonna be wasting your time. Because then all these resumes you done submitted are not even going anywhere. They just threw them away with everybody else's. And so part of understanding just people, and that when it's all said and done, when we're getting into these companies, most likely it's because somebody vouched for you to be there. Somebody is advocating for you to be there. Somebody resonated with you to be in that space. And so outside of just your skill set, because your skill set is one thing, but they're not just leaning on your skill set. Because think about it, even when you're submitting your resume, a lot of these times are being filtered out by AI systems or whatever, the type of filtering systems that are in there. That might be based on your name. It might be based on the fact that you didn't have a keyword, even though you had the skill set, but it wasn't written a particular way because you didn't have the keyword that it was filtering and searching for. So out of all those different things, just understanding people and then understanding these systems, particularly, because a lot of the companies have them, and operating those in that kind of capacity, I think that's how you can really, navigate forward.
Ms. Portia, I would love to hear your perspective on this.
Okay, well, I will tell you one of the things, and you're right. When you go up to the career booth, first of all, I believe that if they are serious about diversity, there is going to be somebody that looks like you, that's black in the career booth. If not, to me, that's kind of a red flag because you didn't have anybody to send. I mean, really. So you're waiting for me to be that first person. Maybe that's not where I necessarily want to be. I also say that when you see the long lines, that may be a company that you were really interested in, but look around because there's somebody else who's standing there in a booth that isn't talking to anyone, that is still there to hire someone, and you could be that one hire. So I say, make your list. If you're going to a career fair, I always encourage people, make a list of the companies that you want to talk to. Check down your list. You see there's a long line there, circle back, go to the next company, because there's no reason for you to stand in line for an hour to be with Bubbly Becky, and she just say thank you very much and move on, and you feel like, what happened? And so it's a process. I think that companies have to do something to, number one, to attract you to even come to their booth, to even be interested. But you also have to have when you get there, you have to have your resume right. And oftentimes we're not looking at, we don't have anyone to review our resumes. And so we are going to have a session, as a matter of fact, next Thursday and Friday, right here, to help review your resumes. Because oftentimes there may be a misspelled word, and somebody's going to say, they didn't even take the time to even read it. They didn't, so they're going to, so you go to I call it the circular file, which is a trash can. And so, that's the last place you want your resume to end up. But again, you do need, sometimes we need help with, paying someone to professionally write your resume for you. I always tell people, I said, you want a $250,000 job, but you don't want to spend $1,000 on a resume? Then maybe I don't want to work with you because you're not willing to make the commitment, because we oftentimes have to make the commitment to invest in ourselves. And to be open to feedback and to know that this is what I want to do, to make sure that the right words are on the resume before you put it into the system, because it won't get, it won't bubble to the top. But we'll talk about the interview at some point, but certainly getting yourself ready to at least be recognized and to perhaps get an interview with the company is absolutely key. And you've got to look the part too. So don't go in, looking funky. The things that you want to make sure doesn't prohibit you from getting the job. I had a class at Howard University, and I talked to them about, okay, if you have 7 earrings in your ear, you got real long nails and all, then somebody sitting there saying, okay, how many earrings does she have? They're not even looking. They're not even listening to what you're saying, because they're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's like, and I'm being real, how do you even wipe your behind with, because some people have long, elongated nails, and you're sitting there wondering how. So, and I've heard the recruiters in the bathroom say this at events. So it's not like, I'm telling you what I've heard. And so just to make sure that you look the part, if nothing else, black and white works, whether it's a black pants and a white t-shirt. But you always know you can come dressed like the choir.
I want to ask, so in the generations that we're in right now, right, like how they show up in their eyes is, this is my authentic self, and people should be able to accept me authentically. But then we do also understand that we're in a system that is not really built for us to be authentic. We had to pass a federal bill just for black women to be able to wear their hair the way it is. So I would like to just expound a little bit more on that looking the part, especially from Myisha's perspective in the DEI space. How do we help professionals, black professionals, in a sense, look the part, but then still show up authentically in that space?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just, honestly, I think there's always two sides of me. Part of me is this radical, F that, we gonna try, it's gonna be authentic, professionals rooted in white supremacy, so, which is all true. But at the end of the day, right, we gotta pay our bills. We live in a capitalistic society. Right. Bills gotta get paid. You gotta get a job. You gotta get, hopefully keep the job. So unfortunately, I think there is always going to be a level to where, it really sounds great, the soundbite of bringing my authentic self to work, right? I think that's something we should all aspire to. I think companies, they're trying, they're doing things to try to communicate that that's what they want to happen. But at the end of the day, we also know that, to a point, right? You know what I'm saying? You can't come to work, depending on your job, in the way that you would go out here to, I don't know, to a party or whatever you're gonna go to. I think there is a level of still understanding the, we still have the code switch. Those things are unfortunate, and it sucks, and it is mentally exhausting and draining. But at the end of the day, it's there's still this game. We're still in this game within this system. You have to understand when and how to play the game, in order to, to stay in it and to move through it. So as much as, like I said, one part of myself wants to be you know what, I'll give it a damn. I think that we are moving into a direction where now, tattoos or piercings, all that stuff is not so cliche or looked down upon. So I think we're moving, locks, things like that.
Right.
We're moving in the right direction. Do I ever think it'll ever be a job is going to go completely from suited and booted to show up in your sweatpants and your, probably not. There's going to be always standards. But I think I would say there's that balance. And I think within yourself, you have to know what that balance is. The balance of knowing when the expectations so much go against who you are authentically to the point to where it's no longer worth trying to play the game at that place, right? I think you have to know your balance. Like for me, I know I don't want to work at a place anymore in my career where I have to be in a skirt, suited up, that is not my place where I feel like I can grow and thrive. And so I think you just have to know your boundaries.
I think what companies, as you said, like they're shifting and they're evolving, and in that retaining space for you to be able to show up authentically, they're now creating these safe spaces like ERGs or belonging groups or whatever. Do you guys feel like that these spaces are helping Black professionals stay in their spaces, or has it just been more of a space to where we just gonna complain about all the microaggressions and go back to our desk afterwards?
Kind of a combination.
Yeah, that was it's a little mixed, personally.
Go ahead.
So I would say it's kind of been a mixed, and it depends on the intentionality of the group, right? And if it's structured in such a way saying that, hey, here's these different objectives that we're trying to accomplish, and here, kind of divvying up the work so that we're doing those things, and it's not just social events, then I would say that it's more promising rather than just, sometimes you do need that therapy though too, just to make sure that I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one that's experiencing this, because oftentimes you might feel like this is only your experience. So to be surrounded by other people who might have a shared experience, then that also should promote change as well. So if you have enough people talking about it, enough people that are recognizing it, and I know even at Honeywell, we have some of our executive leaders might, join some of these meetings or, attend and try to figure out, okay, let me hear exactly from you, what exactly are you experiencing? So then to have some of those counterparts kind of join some of those spaces as well, I think that also helps, instead of just having this feedback loop where it's just only us. Well, we all recognize what the problem is. That's not who needs to hear it. Yeah. So you need to make sure that you have other people in the room that need to hear whatever the problem is or how we adjust it, or even hear the perspective about what are they doing to make changes. Because sometimes there might be some things in place and we don't know that they're being made or at least being conversed about. So that's kind of that slippery slope there. I don't feel like it should be a feedback chamber of just, problems, because we never get anywhere. And if that would have been the case, then we wouldn't be where we are today if that would have been just the case. So we're getting there.
And I'm gonna use this last one because I knew that we're probably gonna go a little bit deep on this, but I feel like when it comes to retaining Black talent, it's not always just on the company. Right. The company can only do so much to create those safe spaces, to create that culture and things like that. But once that professional steps outside those doors, there's now a community, especially if they're new to the city, that is supposed to help them feel welcome. Me and Miss Portia, we talked about the first thing that Black people do when they move to a new space is where I'm gonna get my hair cut, where I'm gonna go to church. Right. You know what I mean? We want to figure out those two things. And then where's my community? And so how do I want to question this? Because I want to go into how can the community help Black professionals feel more welcome in the spaces that they're in?
I would say, one of the things that I try to do when I recruited Black people to Kansas City is to make sure that they join certain organizations. So they were a member. I used to recruit MBAs. So I wanted to make sure that they were a part of the National Black MBA Association, the Kansas City chapter. So I paid for that to make sure that they had membership there. And they were given opportunities to me in those spaces that they may not have been able to get, at the company. So they could be the president of the organization. They could be a leader within the organization. There were several leadership opportunities for them that they may not have gotten on the job that helped them get better so they could bring that back to the position. But I do think that oftentimes you come to a new city, and I've lived in multiple cities, and you are looking for someone who looks like you to tell you where can I get my hair done, where's the AME church, what's the best one for me to go to, where can I get some soul food? Yeah. That's what at the end of the day, those are some of the things that even recruiters are not thinking about, even when in trying to recruit us. So one of the things that I used to do is I used to take people down on 18th and Vine, let them see the Negro League Baseball Museum and the Jazz Museum, and see our community, whether they were Black or white. You still had to make that trip down there. So I want you to see all of Kansas City, not just the plaza. And I think that's important. And to be able to showcase, here are certain parts of the city, where you can live. Here's another part of the city that you can live, so that you have at least options. Because you know yourself what makes you happy. Because some people say, well, I want to live. When I lived in St. Louis, I lived in the Central West End, right off of Kings Highway. So I wanted to be closer to the city. And that's what some people will want. Others will say, oh no, I need to be out in the county. And so, but I think given a choice, because we all are different, and we're not just, we're not the same necessarily. And so to be able to say and listen, all you have to do is listen, because people will tell you what they're interested in, but you've got to be open also.
And I would say where the community can get a little bit better about forming that ecosystem is just having some shared space where we would know of the organizations that exist in that space, right? And that can be something that you can copy and paste for all the different, cities that we know. Because I know NSBE will have chapters all over, right? So then most times we'll have somebody say, hey, we know you just took a job somewhere. They'll connect you with somebody in that city who's part of whatever said chapter, and they kind of usher you in. So in that way, you already have the community before you even take that leap or make that move or relocate and all those kind of different things too. Because oftentimes we're just trying to form these communities once we get there, when you should hopefully have the opportunity to form those communities prior to getting there, to really evaluate, is that really the move you should be doing, especially if you're uprooting a family, some of those different things, like what is the crime rate looking like, what's the neighborhoods looking like, what's the, everything. I mean, because some companies I've worked for in the past, there were people who were moving here and they said, oh, well, it's going to be in Kansas City. And they're completely on the Missouri side. Like, I'm talking about deep Missouri. And they got to commute like 45 minutes to the Kansas side, not recognizing that those are two different places. Because to them, all they saw was Kansas City. They're not from there. So that's what they look for. Or it might be vice versa. So if we could have a shared platform or place that lists those different organizations, so similar to your point, if they are an engineer, they know to connect with NSBE. If they are a professional of any capacity, then we can connect with Black Excellence KC. If they are, with the MBAs, like having those different places, they can connect to all those different groups and then find that camaraderie in that fashion. I think would be fantastic.
This episode was brought to you by Proximity, the feature app of Black Excellence KC. Just to let you know. So just to let you know. By the way, since you said that, but no, go ahead, Myisha. She's gonna say something.
I was just gonna say, I think that's spot on. Like, I think that ecosystem piece is so important because we all know just how much harder it is for us to find that connection when we move somewhere new. It's like, okay, like you said, we got to find a hairdresser. We got to find okay, now we're looking at okay, where's the Black people at? Where do they go? Where's all, it's just so much harder to do that. So if there is, a way to kind of consolidate that or make that a lot easier and accessible to folks, I think that definitely helps. I would also say investment in, Black businesses, Black, nonprofits, Black organizations who are trying to better the community for Black folks or just the community in general, right? Like, I think that's important too. When people feel like they're in a community where they can grow and thrive, like that definitely makes a difference to their experience and whether or not, they want to stay there.
And I honestly feel like it's on the community. It's on the Black community to be able to help retain Black professionals, because even in preparing for NSBE, me and Ms. Portia, we went on a whole listening tour with civic organizations who are, touting the incoming companies that quoted themselves, we need 4,000 engineers just to be able to operate, but we can't get them to invest in providing that conference or being in the conference, providing space for Black professionals to engage with them. How can we, or what do we, I guess, I'm trying to ask a question without just being on my soapbox and just being like, I'm pissed off at all these people who are not cutting a check. But but essentially that's what I need.
Yeah, because to me, if you're really committed, then you're going to have to write a check. I mean, that's what it's going to take in order to do something different. You want to do something different, you want to attract people to the city, then it's not going to be free. We're not coming for free. You're going to have to pay, and you're going to have to pay competitive salaries. That's one of the things that we oftentimes don't discuss is, what are our salaries? And I think that needs to be brought out so that you have a community, so exactly, this is the offer that I got. Is this fair or not? And for someone to be able to say, oh, no. As a matter of fact, I just talked to a guy 2 days ago who's a software engineer, and he talked about every time he's moved, he's more than doubled his salary, because what he didn't realize was how low they were lowballing him with the salary. And so when he found out, it's like, I'm out of here. So I think that one of the things that we have to do is be fair. So, I mean, you want to attract more Black talent, you're going to have to invest, and that means writing a check in different opportunities where you are partnering with NSBE, you're partnering with Black MBA, you're partnering with, Black Excellence Kansas City. You're going to have to be our partner, and that does mean not just showing up, but also giving.
I just want to give a quick, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say part of that problem too, and this is where you kind of run that slippery slope there. So about the retaining piece is that because companies most times are met with unwillingness to want to, pay your worth kind of starting out, they might hit you with the low ball aspect of it. They might come in maybe, if you're lucky, at the median, about the medium size. They're never hitting you with the high end of the salary. Even if you try to, you can edify your skill set, suggest why you deserve to be at the top of that, because they'd like to suggest, well, we want to give you room for growth. Like, what does that even mean? But the same token, though, is that instead of trying to fight, and this is my own personal perspective, but that retaining piece, I personally battle with in the sense of instead of trying to fight these companies, especially if you're finding that you're not being valued, I don't think you should be just sitting there, trying to fight them for this little 3 to 5%, bonus. With you just simply stepping outside of that company will get you 15%, 30%, 50%, double X. And that is what, especially what we're finding in tech and engineering and software, when you can do remote jobs or do work multiple remote jobs. I mean, we're in a different type of landscape, and I think if companies were to recognize how aggressive and competitive that particular piece is, especially if you're trying to market to younger professionals, right? That is how you're going to meet them there. And if you're not willing to come in where they can edify themselves and saying they deserve that particular value, then you're going to be met with somebody saying, you know what, I'd rather sit on my mom's couch and work remote with these other 2 jobs to double the salary that you wouldn't give me. And I've had CEOs that have mentored me in some of these spaces, and they said this: when you're walking into a company, the moment that you sign a salary negotiation of any sort of anything, you are allowing them to tell you how much your time is worth. So if you're walking in and say $60,000, that would equate to $30 an hour or something like that. You are literally allowing them to tell you that your 60 minutes of your life is only worth $30. Like, sit with that. Would that really be okay with you? And if it's not, then your loyalty to these companies shouldn't exist there. I personally believe that. So then it's just like, really vouch for yourself in these spaces and don't rely and try to fight them on those 3 to 5%, especially if you know you deserve it. So then I personally believe, again, don't quote me, don't do it to my companies, but I'm just saying you have better opportunity when we're talking about growth and aggressive growth. Like, we are in a different era of where we are aggressively trying to grow, because we, at the end of the day, we are not looking to retire at 65 when, and saying that's the moment now we can sit by the beach. And we all recognize that people who are retiring now don't even have the money to even do that. So it's just like, that's not appealing anymore. So then from that perspective, instead, you can basically jump those categories, do quantum leaps, as they say, by simply going outside of that company. And there's people who I know left a company because they wouldn't pay them that. Left the company only for a year, because you only need 12 to 18 months for it to really equate to be an adequate work experience. From there, then they came back into that company, and that company was forced to pay them additional, had you just given that 3 to 5% or 10% they were asking for. Right. It's like, that doesn't make much sense. So that's my 2 cents.
And I will say this. I have a girlfriend who got a great job paying a lot of money, and yet she was working 80 to 100 hours a week. Oh no. Okay. And so my thing was, like I told her, I said, well, your $250,000 job really is $125,000 because you're working 2 jobs. And so, but she thought that she had to prove herself, and that they were going to do more for her. And they quite honestly thought, why is she still here? It's 9:00 at night. She didn't get her work done. So sometimes it doesn't work to our advantage to do the extra, because then they think you're slow.
And that's that exploitation of that boundary piece.
That's right.
It's not being, one, you have to be an advocate for yourself.
Yes.
And that's why I said, when that company is, saying, hey, we are a family, be careful of that, because that really is them saying, you know what, we're so much a family, we want you to pick up this work when they can't show up, and you're going to step in for them, and you're going to work a little bit of extra hours for the sake of the company and believing in the mission. It's like, that only goes so far. We still got families, we still got kids, different things of that nature. And what people don't realize, if they really sit down and understand time, life, of your life, like time of your life. That is just baffling how freely we give it away and not willing to get compensated for it. And what you'll find is that you'll spend the majority of your life
working,
being at these companies.
Yes.
Then your family. That's literally where you spend the majority of your life.
Yeah.
So
And
you
that's
better
sad.
make sure it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
When you
better
really
make
think
sure
about it, you're like,
You're
wow.
right about that.
No, I full-heartedly, like, am totally in agreement with you. Like, I will always advocate for, like, yes, advocate for yourself, but also know when it's time to go. And you have to set those very clear boundaries with yourself of like, okay, I'm gonna give it this year, I'm gonna do these things. And at some point you gotta know when this is just not the place for you. And I think it's so important for folks to ask those really tough questions where you're going through performance management or whatever it looks like at your company. Like, ask those questions of like, okay, first of all, get some clarity around your roles and responsibilities. Because what we come to realize is a lot of times people don't even know what's expected of them. So they're just doing work to do work and continue to do more work and get more work later on. And really, exactly, the level that they're at,
2%.
they're about 150% beyond their scope, but because they haven't grounded themselves in their actual roles and responsibilities, or they don't have leadership or processes that help ground themselves in that, they're just continuing to work and not being compensated for the work that they're doing. They may be getting compensated, but it ain't for the work they're doing. And so I think, first of all, be willing to ask those questions like, okay, so what exactly, I want to see documentation. What's my roles and responsibilities? I want to see a leveling guide. So what does this level look like compared to the next level, so I can better understand how I get to the next level. Now, mind you, it's not going to be all black and white. I understand there's going to be ambiguity. That's great. But at the bare minimum, I should be able to know bare minimum expectations from my role to the next, right? Like, ask those questions. And if you can't get answers, that's very telling. Because how do I know how I can grow if I have nothing to ground myself in? And not having clear processes like that impacts Black folks the most in particular, right?
Yes.
Those who are already marginalized in the workplace. So definitely advocate for yourself, ask the tough questions, but at some point when it's time to go, like my sister and I, we had a conversation a couple years back, we're like, you know what, the appreciation generation is gone. Like, people,
Yes.
back in the day it was like, oh, I'm just happy to have a job. Now we're like, damn, a job. Like,
Right,
it's like,
right,
y'all not
right.
about to run me to the ground.
Right.
Like, I got to go. Like, yes, I've only been here for a year, but I have to go. And I may only be at the next place for a year, because if they ain't got their stuff together, I will be there for a year as well. And I think as black folks, I think companies need to realize, like, we are, like, transparency, authenticity is so important for us, because there's just one thing that my sister, we always joke about, like, because we listen to these like scam podcasts. We're like, we just don't be out here getting scammed. Like, people just be out here getting schemed because we are skeptical, and I think that's kind of like just been ingrained, in us. But that's why it's so important to be transparent, to be authentic, because we can smell some things from a mile away, and at some point you realize, like, yeah, this is not it. I got to go.
All right, so as we wrap up, we've been talking a lot about from the professional side. So I would like it if you all can give, just a 1 minute pitch to a company on, if they're like, hey, the floor is yours when it comes to our retention efforts. What is the number one thing that you would tell them to do to help them retain Black talent? I know you can't narrow it down to just one, but try if you can.
Have some Black people on your board and in the C-suite.
Be intentional about mentorship, and as well as those social events, making sure that they are facilitated or at least ideated with Black people in mind, so they're a shared experience to be enjoyable, because a lot of these social events are not really geared towards us, so that would help.
I would say, and I kind of said this on LinkedIn in my post about this event, I said, folks need to realize you need to focus on movement and not moments. So I think a lot of companies, to the ERG point earlier, when you mentioned it earlier, we focus so much on like these moments in time and these celebratory things, like, let's make them feel good. But you're not focusing on the actual systemic change. And if you are, a lot of times we don't know about it. So that's why you need a comprehensive DE&I communication strategy, because you have to be able to bring folks along on that journey and make sure they understand the things that are happening behind the scenes. Otherwise, it just seems like it's performative. So I would say definitely, I'm not saying that the ERG events and the moments aren't important to us as well, but what's the movement that's happening? Like, how are you shifting your culture? How are you ensuring equity within your processes. Those are the things that you have to be focused on in addition to the moments.
Love it. I really appreciate y'all. I feel like we need to do a part 2 to this, because I want to talk about like the bottleneck when it comes from recruiting Black talent to the hiring managers not hiring that Black talent.
Oh, yeah.
There's a whole lot of that that's happening that we didn't get to really unearth in these last 45 minutes. So if you're a company that would like to have more insight about this, please contact BXKC at any time, or just I actually might just do a part 2 to this. But really appreciate you ladies for joining me on this talk. Like I said, we'll be having a networking event here next week on Thursday and Friday to host some of our NSBE participants. If you would like to just come, network, eat some good food, listen to DJ Q, and maybe even support one of these professionals with their resume development or giving them some interview tips, we'll be hosting that space here from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. And just appreciate you all joining us for Rebuild Honestly, and we'll see you in a month.
All right, see you next time.